about yourself for us to start with. You're welcome, ma'am.
Hey, thank you very much for the introduction. And yeah, so that's basically me in a nutshell. But
Okay.
what wasn't actually added is that, of course, I'm a Nigerian. That is already showing in my name, Durojaye. I'm a Yoruba. And I also studied in Nigeria before I actually went out of the country.
Okay.
I had my, I finished from Ijaniki College of Education. And then I went to University of Lagos, actually, where I had up to my master's level. And it was at the point of PhD that I actually left the country. And yeah, so, and thank you very much for having me. Sorry?
Welcome. So the art of science of research, a perspective on methodology for studies of Nigerian music. You want to give us your speech on that so that we can now engage you on our views too as well, scholars and
Right. Thank you very much. Okay, so just basically to give an overview of what I want to talk about is actually mainly about, because when I was contacted or when we are having discussion, the picture I got or something is that, okay, so, which is also like, it's not a Nigerian thing, first of all, to say, is actually an issue generally in terms of the way we think about methodology and the way we then apply this methodology in our research. And we all know, of course, as scholars, as researchers, that without a sound methodology, we are hardly working, so to speak, And when we have a very, very good sound basis, methodological sound basis, of course, whether we are writing theses, whether we are writing for grants, whether we are writing articles or whatever we are actually working on, without this sound methodology, we are actually really not there. And so that's basically what I really want to talk about there. And something that I noticed generally also in the very few years that I've been working in this area is how there's so much confusion in terms of the different research approaches. And when there's this confusion, it actually also translates to what we do eventually. And sometimes what then happens is that when we work, our work is not really, how did I put this? Like going out there in a way that it should actually go out there and make an impact. So most of the things I'm going to say, some of you probably have heard of it, but for me, what I really want to do is to make it clearer in terms of the way we think about all of this thing and how it actually translates into our work eventually that we produce out there. So I will start from talking about introduction of what is research methodology and all that, and give a brief overview of the existing research approaches now. And then, because music studies, of course, even though we use other approaches, but we are more into the qualitative approach. So I will really talk more about the qualitative approach methods, and I will look into issue of conducting ethical research. That's very, very important. And lastly, I will talk about how we actually present and communicate our research in a way that, people are really able to click into whatever we do. So when we're talking about research methodology, is actually, again, this sometimes a confusion, some people, where they think is only about the methods that we actually use in, gathering information. However, methodology is actually, it entails everything that we do in research, starting from the point of thinking about the questions we want to ask, up to the point of even communicating our research. That is what the whole methodology is about. That's everything that guides everything, all that we do in terms of research. And why is research methodology very important? Because when one has a very, very clear methodology defined from the beginning, we are able to, it enables us to clarify our objectives, and we are able to focus our efforts on answering specific research questions without going too broad, going too far, and staying within what we are actually trying to communicate. And of course, it's also related to the fact that it helps to streamline the research process, making your research, more efficient, and it reduces the likelihood of having errors and inconsistency. And it also tells people that we are able to show that we have a valid research, and our findings are actually reliable and credible, and that we have conducted an ethically sound research. Okay, so what are the research approaches that are out there? Mainly, I must say, though, that in terms of this quantitative, qualitative mixed research, there's an argument generally in terms of some people don't really want to use these terms, but for the most part now, a lot of people categorize their research into any of these three, whether it's quantitative or qualitative or mixed. And all of these three research approaches or paradigms, some people call it paradigms, all of these research paradigms, they have category, which is a collection of criteria that will come together to actually be able to determine whether we are conducting quantitative, qualitative, or a mixed research. So it can be about how do you apply the research? Is it pure research, basic research, or is it applied? Is it describing? What is the objective? What are we trying to find out? Are we trying to find correlations between stuff? Are we trying to explain a phenomenon? Are we trying to just explore? What type of information are we seeking? Are we looking to crunch numbers and look at statistical relations to be able to, for example, do correlational studies? Or are we looking at describing people's experiences, going to the field, going to the natural settings? So all of these things, they don't stand alone. A combination of them together is what makes us to be able to determine, okay, this is quantitative. And one thing I've seen in most of the work, because like I said, I also finished from Nigeria, is that sometimes we mixed up this where we actually, for example, conducting qualitative research, and then maybe we are then using the language or the whatever other methods that is going on with quantitative, where we are not even saying whether we are using mixed research, and we say, yeah, this is qualitative research, and then we are portraying it, following some of the things is quantitative. A research is not just qualitative or quantitative or mixed without combining all of the stuff that make it to be in that field. And also, apart from whether we define based on objectives or application, is also the worldview determining that research approach. This is the philosophical part of it, excuse me, which I will not want to go into detail into, but I will just quickly mention a bit about it. For example, there is this positivism and post-positivism school of thought, which actually believe in the nature of reality. The nature of reality of these three that I have here is actually different. The nature of how they believe the world should be, how they believe the relationship between you as a researcher and what you are researching. All of this worldview is different, and they also guide how we then collect our data, how we then go into the field to conduct our research. For example, positivists, we believe that there's only one truth, for example, and that research should be very, very objective, and that there should be distance between the researcher and the researched, or whatever it is that you should actually maintain distance. So that makes sense when, for example, they then conduct experiments, because experiments telling them that, okay, we are removing all biases, and that's why we are conducting experiments. So it makes sense in that way. Whereas constructivists, they believe that there's multiple realities. The truth can be multiple. It's not only one way that leads to Rome. There are so many ways. There are so many ways to look at truth. There are multiple truths, and truth is socially constructed. And that, and because of this constant construction of the truth, then we have to be subjective. Research can just not, because we are talking about experiences of people, including the experience of the researcher. Therefore, it has to be subjective. And then they use qualitative. That's why you see them conducting interviews. That's why you see us going to the field in the case of music, doing ethnomusicology study, going to the field. So all of this worldview is actually also translate to everything that you do, including how you conduct studies. So for example, if you believe that there's only one truth, and then like you are going into positivist area, and then you go to the field to the natural setting to collect your data or to gather information is definitely not looking like is definitely at odds against each other. And then there's pragmatists who believe that, what, it doesn't even matter the nature of truth or whatever. It's what actually matters is what works for this research is about the research question. What is my research question, and how best do I answer the research question? And that is where they don't mind whether to combine qualitative approach or quantitative approach, and that is the mixed people. And knowing this worldview actually is very important because it guides, like I said, how the entire thing that we do, whether we are talking about research for thesis, whether we are talking about research for grants or everything, is always like the worldview is always there, and it's what guides research. And this worldview also actually affects the emphasis of each of these research as well. So as you can see here, where our quantitative approach is always this top-down approach. Some people actually call it two-party theory. We then take and then find test hypotheses, doing whatever. And then say, okay, here is, after testing the hypothesis, here is what we get. Particular to general inductive approach, where we this particular dance, and when I get information about this dance, I can then apply it to a bigger issue or to a bigger subject or a bigger population or something like that. And that is where the idea behind qualitative, where is basically exploratory, is bottom up, the other one is top down. And of course, the research objective of quantitative is usually about numerical data, is usually about to find causal explanation. When these things happen, this thing happen. When people, I don't know, the other day in the group, what was the discussion about English or something like that, and how it affects school performance. All this causal explanation is as qualitative people, what they just want to do is that we want to explore, we want to have an understanding of what is going on about a phenomenon. And then we look the nature of observation is that the quantitative people, also because they live in one fruit, remember from the slide, also make to though they are under very, very controlled conditions. That's when they then have something like control this group, let's check it so that we know every other factors, every other variables, and it's only one variable that is talking. We are not mentioning so many whereas the qualitative people, where we conduct when we do focus groups, we are actually looking to conduct this in settings to gain insider views, different meanings, of the field they are working with. So because you are looking at I did this, I did that, rather than we did this. It's not about pride, it's not about arrogance at all. It's about what is guiding the field. They're simply saying, I am part of my research. I acknowledge that this research is subjective. And that is why I'm using I, because my own experiences, whether I like it or not, is also there in this research. Say, for example, you go to a field. Let me use my own, because I studied the talking drum. I was looking at emotion. So I basically use mixed methodology, by the way. So I do a lot of run-back crotching. I do a lot of natural settings mixed. And so say, for example, you are studying the drum, and then you go there you're looking at dundu ensembles or something like that. And then the truth of the matter is that there's a way they perform, there's a way they do stuff. But the moment you are there as a researcher coming for fieldwork and you are staying with them, and I'm talking about fieldwork not of one day carrying tape recorder and just recording this music in this moment and going back home. I'm talking about field work where you spend a lot of time in the field. And I'm talking about something like 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and so on and so forth in the field. And you are there. The fact of you being there, something has changed in terms of their settings. Whether it has to do with your gender, whether it has to do with your status, whether it has to do with your education, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a female, something has changed in terms of your setting. So your experience has come into the field with you. And this experience is what some field, anthropology, ethnomusicology will tell you, you have to bring it into your writing. And that is why they will use the personal pronoun to say I, to say that I acknowledge that there are multiple truths in the worldview. I acknowledge that it's subjectivity. Therefore, I'm using the I. That's where it's coming from. Not pride, not arrogance at all. And also imagine if you're also presenting in oral presentation, or let me say we write, and somebody is writing, and I'm here or somewhere outside, and I don't really know what is the culture in Nigeria that people write with we because they thought, well, they don't want to use I so that they don't sound proud. And I'm reading two things. It will tell me if I'm seeing we. Either I will go back and look at the author list. Are there more than one person? That's number one. Or I'm thinking, are they acknowledging the voices of their participants in the field? And I will be looking for that in the write-up. If I don't see that in the write-up, that they are saying, okay, I'm giving power to my participants as well. We are all on the same level. We all share this knowledge. That's why I'm using we. If that is not the case, I will find it a bit awkward to be reading we when it's only one person that is talking. And the use of passive, like or the third person, like the researcher then did this, the researcher then did that, or this was done, or that was done. It's also the language of quantitative people because of their worldview. The worldview is separating the researcher from the researcher. They're coming from the objectivity part of the thing. And that is why they use passive to really again show in their language that we stay away from this research, we are not affecting it, and so on and so forth. So what I've seen actually in so many write-ups from Nigeria, whether in thesis or something, is where we basically say, okay, we conduct field studies, but is it that we use we, or we still use passive? You can do that maybe if you are using mixed method. You can actually, because again, to use my own as example, I actually did that, where okay, how do I bring these two areas together? When I was writing the general writing, I was using the impersonal and the passive, which, by the way, I've explained since my chapter 1 that that's what I was going to do. And then when I wanted to use my personal pronoun, I created a vignette so that anything that has to do with my experiences in the field, I was creating that separately so that to bring these two lives together somehow because of the kind of approach that I use, which is mixed. So all of this thing, and also another thing, yes, I remember that I've also noticed in terms of writing in Nigeria, which I know this is a very, very big issue because it's almost like in all of the universities, is to also talk about the language that is being used in the field. For example, if you are conducting qualitative research and you are talking about what is that? No, chapter 3 is always is always methodology chapter, right? And people will write something like sampling technique. What is all this thing that I usually see? Data collection. These are not language of qualitative at all. You see why it's at odd. And that's why sometimes when we write for grants and we write for all of these things, that is not being accepted because you are simply not speaking the language of the people you are sending your work to. So imagine I'm talking to somebody from the east, for example, from the north, and I'm speaking to them in my own language that is not their language. They can't understand me. So how do you think they really accept me into their circle? So that's exactly what is happening here, where you are saying, I conduct qualitative research, I go to the field, but then sampling technique, sampling cycle, and what are all these words? Something like that is completely not going together because that is not the lingo. That is not the language they use in that field. You know, instead of talking about data, you talk about gathering information or working with the people. You don't say you do data collection. You don't say you do sampling. You say, how do I get my participants? You don't call them subjects or how I sample population or all of those things that I usually see. Yeah, so all of these things, they are not just coming out of the bubble. They are coming from somewhere. That's the point I want to make. So, because I'm trying to like keep to time. And go to research methods. Again, from what I've seen, like I said, I will be focusing more on qualitative research, not because I don't see quantitative in music, but I think they are more tilting towards qualitative study, especially when I'm looking at Nigerian music studies, is more tilting for the most part towards qualitative. And these are the common methods that we have, historical phenomenology, grounded theory, ethnography, case study, content analysis, which can also be a method of analysis, and then action research. So I'll be looking at each of them. So phenomenology basically is when you actually set out to understand how individuals experience, remember the word experience is very important, a phenomenon from the perspective of that person's view, from that person's own perspective, so his personal experience. So for example, maybe you want to find out about emotions, so you can use it for music therapy. You can actually use phenomenology for a lot of things. You can also mix it with ethnography, for example. But I'm just giving an example of what music area that can actually fit. And when we are conducting, some people call it narrative. So we see in some textbook as narrative, you see in some textbook as historical. But the basic thing is that they want to understand how individuals make meaning of their lives and the world around them through studying their stories and experiences. Sometimes it focuses on the past. When it focuses on the past, then that's when it's clearly historical, but it can also focus on the present. So, and this we use for musicology. Now, let me quickly clear something. My use of musicology here is coming from European way of using it. So here, for example, when we talk about musicology, or when they talk about musicology here, they are basically talking about historical stuff, historical musicology. So they actually separate between systematic musicology and musicology. They actually separate between ethnomusicology and musicology and something like that. So when they mention a musicology, I know that it's not the same understanding of musicology that we have in Nigeria. So me saying this historical whatever is coming from this way of thinking, just to clear that up. So ethnography, a lot of us probably we have done that or about to do that if we're still just going to the field, if we're just graduate students here. Yeah, so it's basically about discovering and describing a culture or some aspect of it, like music, like dance, whatever it is that we are doing, of a group of people. That one is very clear. Now, I will talk about grounded theory last because it's the baby of the house, so to speak, and is really the reigning queen now. So case study, again, I think everybody should know that is actually focusing on only one issue, one event, one person, or a group. It can also be a group of people, though, as a case study. But the difference between case study, really, and maybe either narrative or phenomenology is that it actually goes in depth, is doing exploration and explanatory, and all of these things is kind of combining it. And you can also use case study actually for quantitative study. That's actually a difference between case study and this other one. Action research, the thing about action research is that you are not just doing the research for doing the research sake. You actually want an action to be taken. Kind of, you are bringing out a problem and you are bringing out a solution at the same time. So, for example, if you are working with a community, for example, to do music together, maybe to be able to do some sort of empowerment for certain group of people that have been marginalized or something like that, that's a form of action research. And content analysis, like I said, it's also a form of analysis method, yeah, and is actually looking at content of materials like books, like movies, like newspapers. You can use it maybe for music score as well or something like that. Yeah, and then I come to grounded theory. So the idea of grounded theory is that you're actually going to the field with blank head, so to speak, because everything you are doing, you first of all will put literature or the theoretical, this theoretical framework, theory from literature, you have to put it aside because the idea is that you are going to field to bring your own theory. So, and you are going to generate that theory, and it's going to be grounded in the data that you have collected, meaning that you are not going with theoretical framework. You are not starting with theoretical framework. You are starting with your own data, and you keep collecting the data, and you keep working on it, working on it, working on it. And the idea is not just that you are coming back to give us explanatory something, but you are coming back to develop a theory. So meaning then that, what does it mean also for our writing? Again, another thing that I've seen that is common is where we believe that we just have to have theoretical framework in our writing. That is not true, because also if the theory is not working with your ideology, we don't have to force our work into a theory. Even if you are not using grounded theory, you don't have to force your work into a theory, because if the existing theory is not working for you, you can drop it. Or in fact, just mention it that, okay, I may use this theory, but it's just not complete to explain my phenomenon. So this whole idea of we have to have theoretical framework or conceptual framework or whatever framework that is out there. Again, it depends on how each one, but I'm just saying that it's sometimes it limits us. Yeah, let me put it that way. So yeah, that's actually what grounded theory is about. I will answer a question about it later on so that we can move on. So the question, how do you decide which method or design to use? There are so many things you have to consider. I think these are just the ones I remember. Of course, objective and questions, that is very, very important, because you have to ask, first of all, when I mean objective, not only in terms of the research objective on its own, more in terms of why am I even doing this research? You know, am I doing it to write master's thesis, PhD thesis, whatever? Am I, trying to write for grant funding? Am I doing it to write articles? Because all of this thing with this, decide, I'm linking it also to the resources. We decide which method you want to choose or which methodology. For example, if you are writing for a grant that is like 1 year, you definitely not choose the type of method or methodology that will take too long that you don't have time to analyze, to put your work, compared to, say, for example, if you are doing thesis, PhD thesis that you have like 3-4 years, whatever. So of course it will be different. Or you want to bring an article out, or you want to write about series of articles based on something. You also want to quickly choose a method that you can quickly finish in 3 months, 4 months, or even 2 months, or even 1 month, depending on how you are collecting your data. You also want to consider that. So that's what I mean by, to choose your design, you have to think about that. What am I writing this for? What am I trying to do here? And then you go to your question. What am I trying to find out? What questions am I trying to answer? Because, for example, if you want to find a correlational study where, or something that is leading to some, because this thing happened, that's why that thing happens, you most likely will not look to qualitative. You most likely will go to quantitative in that way, and then even if you now say, okay, I choose qualitative, I choose quantitative, it's now about asking which method will answer my question best and in what way. Say, for example, if you have a question and you want to find out something, and that thing can easily be found in the library, like you can simply go to archival materials and write your paper from there. Do you really need to go to the field and interview people, where you ask yourself, like, where somebody who is reading it, you ask yourself, like, is it really important at the end of the day to ask people? This thing is information that you can easily get from the library. Why is it important to interview people? What are they adding? What are they bringing to the table that you cannot already see somewhere? So you are not just choosing method. You have to also be able to justify why you choose the method, or why you think that method is the best thing. Why am I choosing focus group instead of interviewing people one-on-one, or the other way around, or both? You have to be able to, like, okay, why do I need this? Why do I need to do it this way? And then, of course, you have to consider what resources you have, the project time, like I said before, and funding. For example, if you're a student and you are so much interested, you are studying in Ibadan, for example, and you are so much interested in the music of Benue people. Now, the question is, can you really go there, travel back and forth? Like I said earlier, I'm not talking about take a tape recorder once and follow whatever people for 1 day. I'm talking about real field work in the sense of it. Do you really have the time and the funding to do that? So these are all the things you have to think about, yeah? And then we go to, is my data available? Do I have access to the people I want to work with? Even though I'm interested in Benue music, is the place safe now for me to go? Do I have access to the people? How do I have access to them? Who do I contact? Because, yeah, all of this, again, if question is coming, I can go back into it. And then most importantly, again, is to consider ethical. Am I actually, going into these people, into the community with respect for the people I'm actually, working with also respect in terms of going out. I will give you an example of this. When I was in Nigeria for my field work, I worked with 6 towns in Osun and Oyo State. I worked with 6 towns. And I was in one of the towns, and I think it was Ede or something. And then I was there, and I remember the community I wanted to work with, they will not answer me on time because they said, yeah, that's how you people come, and you come and listen to us, and you just go, and we never hear from you again. This is one thing that they are, kind of clamoring for in ethnomusicology and anthropology now, where when you conduct research with people, like you don't forge results, or it's happening a lot. It's happening a lot where people do not go to field, and then you write as if you are going to field, or you say what doesn't happen, what didn't happen in the field, or what is another common thing, sorry, that I've seen is, yeah, that one, conflict of interest, basically, which is basically like, I'll give you an example of such. One time somebody contacted me and say I should help them look at their a draft of an article they wrote, which I did. And then, gave whatever feedback. And then they came back to me and said they wanted to submit this article, and they wanted to put my name as part of the reviewers. And I remember I said, no, I cannot do that. That is very, very unethical. That I cannot do. Imagine, I've already seen the article, so why should I be one of the reviewers again to see the article? That is just wrong. That is conflict of interest, because how will I really, if I fail that person, or if I actually write whatever rubbish in that person's review, I'm actually rubbishing myself in a way, isn't it? So it's just not ethical. I cannot do that. Or where you help somebody to check their, as an example, to check their funding application, and at the end of the day, you are even still the one they are sending the funding application to after they submitted it. You have to declare it that this is conflict of interest. I cannot do it. Part of it is also plagiarism. That one is a complete different topic on its own, because sometimes a very, very thin line between us talking and us actually plagiarizing or citing or whatever, many of which I've seen, again, is not really much of a Nigerian problem, where people don't know when they have crossed that line, that very, very thin line between me working or using somebody's ideas or whatever. It's not just when you copy and paste 3 lines, 4 lines. That's not the only thing that makes for plagiarism. There's a lot like that, big, that makes for plagiarism. Again, these are all research ethics that we have to think about. I'll not stay more long in it. So generally, having said all of these things, how do you ensure that, okay, I've conducted this, I've conducted my research, but I need to make an impact in my field. I need to join a conversation, and I need to have my voice heard in my community. How do you do that? Of course, you have to review literature in the general field, like review. Because if you don't know what is going on in terms of discussion, how really would you be able to contribute to that discussion? It's like, if you go to a party, all these cocktail parties, you are standing, everybody's standing in 2 and 3s, and then you are joining a group of, say, 3 people that are just standing with their glass of whatever drink in their hands, and then you go to meet them, and then you want to join what they are saying. You first of all have to listen, like, what are they talking about, so that you don't just jump into this thing and just saying something, and they are looking at you like, what are you saying? So you have to know what's actually going on, and then you can adequately join the conversation, to be able to create that area that, oh, okay, this is where I can bring my voice in, find a gap so that your voice can be heard. So, that has to happen. And then the systematic presentation of it, where when you are writing it, again, another thing I've seen is that where in writings, a lot of writings in Nigeria, where we have, whether it's an article, I say it's a lot in articles, or even in thesis, where when you present your literature, we are basically looking for only literature that supports what we are saying or that we agree with. That's just not how literature review works. It's a review. It means critique. And it doesn't mean rubbish somebody's article. It's more, we can be friends. It doesn't matter. It's nothing personal. It just simply means that I don't agree with this point of view. This is my own point of view. And so many research, so many grants have been rejected because of this, because you are not bringing your own opinion to the table. You are simply just agreeing with what everybody is saying, or just finding people who agree with you. You have to present both sides of the argument, not only to show that you know what is going on. So if I'm contributing here, I know what I'm saying because I know everything that is going on in this field, from right, left, front, center, everything. Not only to present all the side of argument and to be able to present your voice, also so that you are able to truly have an opinion in terms of how you are thinking that, okay, I'm not just going this way, I'm thinking this way, I can also think this way too. Or if I eventually tilt this way, this is why I'm thinking this way. You know, where all of these things you have to bring to the table. And what I see mostly is, in fact, it has even happened before. So my husband, he is a German, and he was in Nigeria many years ago to conduct a research in Nigeria, and he was working on something, African pianism. And so he went to do interviews about Akiyuba or something like that. And I think he was arguing about something about Akiyuba. And somebody in Nigeria told him, like, he's a professor, it's Akiyuba, you can't do it. And my husband, you know, because they were not raised in that way or taught in that way, he was like, why not? Like, you wrote something, I don't agree with it, I'm allowed to say my mind, you know, but because of the way we were kind of raised in Nigeria, like, yeah, I don't argue, those is actually not making us a sound researcher, is actually not making us a sound scholar. I'm sorry to say, I'm coming from the system, I just don't know any other way to say it. But we have to be able to engage and not to take it personally at all. Not to take it personally at all. We will be friends afterwards. But when it comes to that, I don't agree. I mean, it's just like food. Some of us, we are at home, we will not like amala, and other members of family will like it. It doesn't mean that we will not be family tomorrow. You know, you can have different views of something. You can have different tastes of something. It doesn't make us enemy. It doesn't mean that I'm attacking you as a person. I'm not also attacking your intellect. I'm only saying that we have different perspectives. And that is it. And I'm bringing my own to the table. You are bringing your. It doesn't mean that I'm right. It doesn't mean that your own is wrong. It just simply means that there are multiple perspectives out there. Simple. So, and then you have to review your method. That's very important. Either you put it in your methodology chapter, if you're writing thesis, or you put it in your literature review chapter. For people who are writing for grants, you have to actually, of course, mention somehow why you are using so method, how it has been used, if you are changing something in it, if you want to use it exactly how it has been used before, who is using it, for what, and all those things you have to actually state. And then it's very important how what we're saying from the beginning in terms of worldview and emphasis of each research area approach, and it also affects how you analyze. And it's very important that you prove rigor. That's another thing that is lacking, where, again, when you submit your thesis outside, when you submit your thesis, when you submit your grant, and they are not really convinced about the rigor in your work, that's sometimes when we get rejected, because rigor is like two ways. It also has to do with validity, where you actually list, say, depending, of course, on what you are writing. If it's thesis, you have to really write a long thing, like the whole thing. If it's a grant, say like for 2 years, of course, you also have to write the full idea of, okay, this is how I'm going to do this, where the people who are looking at your grants, the really application, there is, okay, this person knows what they are doing or what they want to go and do, where you actually really state it, like, okay, I will go to so field, I will talk to so people, I will talk to 10 people, this is what I will ask, this is my interview question guide, this is how I will do it, where it's already very, because if they are confused, if they are thinking that you yourself, you are not really clear about what you want to do, of course, it's rejection that is going to come. And then you have to prove validity. Now, in quantitative, they call this reliability. So again, language. And how do you prove that? Various methods. One common method is to do a triangulation. And how does the triangulation work? It can be like, okay, I want to collect data, I want to collect information from somewhere. Maybe I can actually use data triangulation. That is, I use different forms of data collection. I do natural settings. I'm writing feed notes. At the same time, I'm doing interviews one-on-one, or I'm doing focus group. That's one way. And at the end of the day, when I did these three, they're all saying the same thing, or everything is saying the same thing for me. You have to also prove that, of course, in your writing. Or you can do triangulation from the point of your interpretation analysis, where basically the common one is, say, for example, you go to field and like a ethnomusicologist and you collect data in the field, you can actually call or talk to maybe one of the group members that you spoke to say, did I interpret what you have said well? Is this what you told me? Is this the right interpretation of what we have discussed? That's a form of triangulation, and it's called member checking, that one that I just explained now. And then you can bring it into your writing, or you can also do theory triangulation. Like, there are so many different ways. By the way, triangulation can also be used as a general method. So you can also hear this word triangulation in the quantitative circle, but just in the qualitative circle, you can use it from the analysis part of the thing. Then, of course, when you are done with all of this thing, you want to present and communicate, and you want people. So now you know what is going on in the field. You want to contribute your own voice, but how do you really bring it to the table that people are really listening to you? So of course you have to consider the kind of communication type, whether it's oral, whether it's written, because it will be different when you are talking from when you are writing, like in terms of use of I versus we versus passive. You definitely will not use passive when you are talking, you know. And so it doesn't matter whether you are conducting quantitative or qualitative. So you have to consider that. You have to consider your audience. Who am I actually talking to? With whom am I chatting or discussing this thing? Am I writing a book for students, or am I talking to, you know, the bigger research community? So this is also, is it a conference paper? Is it a radio interview? Because you also have to consider, okay, conference paper, I know I'm talking to academics, so I can use all the academic jargons in the world. But if you are doing a radio interview, remember, it's not only academics that are listening to you. So you have to consider that, okay, let me make this language as simple as possible that everybody is able to understand me, or a press conference or something like that. And then, like I said before, it also influences your writing method, your writing style. I've mentioned that before. I don't want to go back into it. And when you are writing, there has to be a very, very clear difference between, this is a fact, this is my own opinion. If you want to write your opinion, there's so many articles for such, like just say opinion articles, this is my opinion. Or there are so many also newspaper article, also for even for academic opinion articles. But when you are writing something and then you come to a conclusion, I will again use an example of a paper I mentioned in the group long ago, which I wanted to use for my students here. And the paper I was talking about, I've forgotten, but I just know something was mentioned about that young people, they at some point they were smoking, they were going to bars and blah, blah, blah. And then from then, no, for me, that's the logical conclusion, that which now leads to being gay or being whatever. That is, what is that based on a fact? Is that based on a fact? It's not the question, which I doubt. It's not based on fact. It's based on personal opinion. So this has to be very, very clearly stated before somebody will say, oh, okay, what is going on there, and your own argument. And lastly is, what are the important information to include in your methodology section? It doesn't matter what type of writing you are having, all of this have to be there. It's just the degree, like what is the level of detail, is just what is different. But this thing, even if it's one sentence, for example, if you are writing for a small grant or you are writing an article, even if it's just one sentence, has to be there. But of course, if you are writing thesis, you have to write this very long thing about all of this things that I've put here. You know, again, what I've said before about the worldview, justification of your method, why this method and not the other, strategies that you use to generate your data, the procedure that you use, how you are able to prove quality in your work and rigor. And yeah, and I hope with this, like I said, is most of these things, they're actually, it's like onion, this whole thing, because they have so many layers to them. But this is just a brief overview, so to speak. And I think I'm opening the floor for questions. Thank you. And then I can answer when there are questions. Thank you.